Hello Year 11 and welcome to the night before news in preparation for the first of your three maths papers in the November mocks. We're going to be talking through some of the topics that are likely to come up in this exam, and we'll also talk about how you can revise, some reminders about some of the last minute preparation that we're going to put on for you, and how you need to participate in this exam to make sure you're successful. So first of all, in terms of what's going to be in the exam, it's pretty hard to say, to be honest, and I haven't seen the paper. I've made sure not to have seen the paper so that I can give you a really authentic experience of what the actual exams are going to be like. But we don't know what's going to be in the paper. There are a huge number of topics in the maths GCSE, and many of them could come up in any of the papers, and some of them won't come up at all. So knowing what's going to come up in paper one is pretty difficult to predict, but there are some things that are more likely to come up than others. These are the most likely topics to see in a paper one. Fractions is pretty much a guarantee. So you may want to do some work on fractions tonight if you're not confident that you can add, subtract, multiply and divide. And same with decimals, you do need to be able to multiply and divide decimals. Dividing decimals is probably the hardest of those skills, so that might be worth a little bit of your time as well. Estimation is a very common paper one topic. It will not come up in paper two and paper three. So if it doesn't come up in paper one, it's not going to come up at all. It often does come up in paper one. Unit conversions you'll probably see come up in all three of the papers. So it's really important to make sure that you know how to convert between metric units of distance, mass and volume. Distance in particular are the most common ones, so millimeters, centimeters, meters and kilometers. There will be lots of algebra. Algebra will make up somewhere between 20 and 25% of your exam. So make sure you're really confident on all of these basics. Make sure that you can simplify, expand, factorize, solve, and rearrange. Speed, distance, time, very common. Might not come up in paper one. If it doesn't, it will definitely come up in one of the calculator papers, or it could come up in both. Money problems are very, very common, and in particular like 5-mark money style questions. We'll talk a little bit more about where you can revise those later. Fractions of amounts, percentages of amounts and ratios are all hugely common across all of the papers, but you will definitely get some of these in paper one. Exact trig values, you may not have learned this. I know that students in set 3 have. But again, if it doesn't come up in paper one, it's not going to come up at all. It has come up in the exams in the last couple of years, so could well be in your mocks as well. And proportion's pretty broad. It's its own strand. It makes up about 15% of the GCSE. But in particular, some things here that fit into that category: recipes, best buys, and similar shapes. But you could get some pretty basic proportion questions as well. Now, there's more than that to the GCSE, of course. Those are my top predictions, but there are some other topics here. Fraction, decimal and percentage conversions is very common. It's a little bit less common than unit conversions, but can still come up multiple times across the three papers. Nth term of a sequence is a very, very common 2-mark question, or something that you need to be able to do as part of a bigger question. Just mentioned sequences, but there are other types of sequences questions as well that you might come across that use nth term or might not. They can be quite basic. Sequences combined with diagrams is something that's been quite common in the last 2 or 3 years, that we hadn't really seen before then, but it has been in a lot of GCSE papers since. Highest common factor and lowest common multiple, fairly common for a paper one. Can come up in calculator as well, but no reason why it couldn't come up in your non-calculator paper. You will almost certainly get angles questions across the three papers, so make sure you know your angle facts ready for this one. Basics like angles on a straight line, angles around a point, vertical opposite angles. You could get things like angles in parallel lines. You won't get angles in polygons for a non-calculator paper. Plotting graphs, massively common skill in the GCSE. If it doesn't come up in the first exam, it will come up in one of the calculator papers. Error intervals, similar, a little bit less common, but still comes up quite a lot. Could come up in any of the papers, so be ready for it in the non-calculator exam. And transformations, you'll probably see transformations come up in a couple of papers, but another very, very common topic. This next list is things that are a little bit less likely to come up, but could still come up in a non-calculator exam. There are some topics that are pretty much guaranteed to be calculator topics. Probability, I've put this in the possible category, but I'm fairly certain you will get probability questions. It's just that probability is quite broad. So that could be really basic probability, but it could be probability trees. It could be a probability table. I think for a non-calculator exam, the most likely probability question you'll get is probably probability trees, and with fractions, because that won't require a calculator. Standard form, I would say it's slightly more likely to be in the non-calculator exam than the others. So again, make sure you know how to convert into and out of standard form and do calculations with standard form. Stem and leaf, frequency trees, Venn diagrams, and all of your other statistical graphs, even basics like pie charts. Sorry, pie charts isn't that basic, but bar charts, for example. Pie charts is a little bit more likely as a calculator topic, but do be ready for these. I would say Venn diagrams in particular is something that I've seen coming up in paper 1s recently, so could be in your mock. Pythagoras is unlikely in a non-calculator exam, but that doesn't mean it won't come up. You could get a Pythagoras question with quite nice numbers. Area problems as a question by itself, but more likely as parts of bigger questions. Again, a bit more likely to be in the calculator exams, but there's no reason why they couldn't come up with something for a non-calculator paper. Said angles and polygons almost certainly won't come up in non-calculator. Doesn't mean it definitely won't, so you might want to be ready for that. Circles, if you get circles questions in non-calculator, they will be worked out in terms of pi. So a little bit different to what you need to prepare for the calculator exams, but could come up. Simultaneous equations. I've seen this a bit more in non-calculator exams recently. So again, you might want to make sure you're ready for that. And of course, there's lots more. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about some of the different places you can go to find revision. And you can see the full range of topics on those websites. The maths GCSE is very, very broad. And those 3 lists that I've gone through aren't close, to be honest, to being the full GCSE. And I know I've already mentioned a lot of things. Feel free to go back through this video and pause it. And I'd suggest what you do is you have a think about some topics that you know you need to work on. And the things you want to work on aren't the things that you find really, really easy. It can feel good doing revision on those things, but it's not actually going to be helpful. And similarly, it's not the things that you find really, really difficult either. You will want to try and work on some of those things at some point, but now's not the time. If you want to do some revision that's going to improve how well you do in this exam, you want to find the topics that you used to be good at and you've forgotten, or you kind of get but you make mistakes on sometimes, and work on those things, because they're going to be the quick wins. They're going to be the marks that you can pick up in a short space of time. And then the things that you're less sure about, you can work on over a longer period of time. Just talk to your maths teacher and we can make sure we plan those in for you. So in terms of how to revise this evening and how to revise for your maths exams in general, there are 2 approaches that you can take really, and it depends on how well you know your gaps. If you've got a good idea of specific topics that you want to work on, there are some different ways you can do that. You can actually ignore this first bullet point. I need to remove that for the next video, but we don't use Hegarty Maths anymore. You can go on to Sparks Maths and you can use the independent learning section to look up topics that you know you need to work on. There's a website called ExamQ. It's just www.examq.co.uk and it looks like this. So you can change the first filter so it says foundation. You can change the second filter so it says paper 1 non-calculator, the one that you can see here on the slide. And then there is a search bar on the right there where it says topic. You can look up a specific topic and you'll be shown exam questions on that topic, which you can try. And there's a mark scheme there that you can use to answer your work. Well, there's also Maths Genie, which is another great website for looking at individual topics. It's fairly straightforward. Once you get on there, you can click one of these 2 links that say GCSE revision, and you're going to see a link for each topic that could come up in the GCSE. What Maths Genie won't do is differentiate between non-calculator questions and calculator questions, but you'll still get a pretty good idea of what can and can't use a calculator as you work your way through it. There are handwritten answers and videos to a lot of the resources on that website, so it's really good for that. So alternatively, you might want to do practice papers, and this is probably how I would be revising if it was my mocks. Practice papers are definitely one of the best ways you can revise for maths, and by the end of the year you'll have done a huge number of practice papers and there'll be very little that can come up in the GCSE that can surprise you at that point. And it might be that you do practice papers first and then you go back to doing revision of specific topics. I've got one link that I would recommend for this, which is Maths Genie again, but you're going to go into a different part of Maths Genie. If you go to GCSE papers, just make sure you select Edexcel. That's our exam board, and you can see a few different past papers there. And again, they have handwritten solutions and they have videos of someone going through the answers to those questions. So it's a really useful way of making sure you know what to do on those questions. That said, if you print a paper and there's something that you're stuck on and the video is not making sense to you, please do bring that paper in to your maths teacher or down to the revision on the morning of the exam, and we can make sure that someone's able to go through those things with you. So that's a great way of revising. And it might be that you start by doing practice papers. Just make sure you look at paper 1 for the time being, of course, but you might then want to focus in on some specific topics and go back to the other parts of this website or exam queue. So just some final reminders about the morning of the exam. And you've seen all this information before, so it shouldn't be new to you, but the hub is open from 7 o'clock. We will do our best to make sure that we've got maths teachers down there to help you as early as possible. So please do come in with questions. We will have some extra resources available as well. So if you want to have a printed version of an exam paper, we will have some in there. Or we can get you started on the other morning revision a little bit early as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. But come and get help from the maths teachers that are down there. If you've done revision the night before, it's a great opportunity just to make sure that you get some advice on some of the things that you've struggled on. Then we'll have final revision in the conservatory and the canteen from 8 AM. This is what it will look like. So we've got these grids of revision that you can do in the morning, and you can see how many questions there are there. There's 20 there, but there'd be another 20 on the back. One side for grade 4 topics and one side for grade 5 topics. Feel free to do both or either, and there'll be answers available to you. But again, the really important thing during this time is that you get support on the things that you're not sure about. You can try the questions and look on the answers, but again, there will be lots of maths teachers around who can help you. Don't just do all of the things that you find really easy. Again, try and push yourself. Find things that you're not sure about and see if you can do them, or find things that you're really stuck on and ask for help. And then we're going to have line up at 8:25 as usual before we head into the exam. So, just some final advice from me. Last few bits to bear in mind when you do your exam on that morning. So the first thing is to make sure that you attempt every single question that's in that paper. You can obviously only drop a certain number of marks to get whatever grade it is that you're looking for, and if you leave questions blank, then those marks are instantly gone. But it's often easy to at least pick up 1 or 2 marks on some of the harder and bigger questions in the paper. So do make sure you try something. And remember that even if you get a part of your working wrong, if doing that wrong bit of working still enables you to do the next steps, there will be marks that you can be picking up on your way through. Something that we will talk about in the arena before the exam starts is to make sure you read the last line of the question before you move on. That's how you're going to make sure you've actually answered the question that you're being asked and not misinterpreted it in any way. Keep thinking about sensible answers, particularly for some of those bigger, more contextual questions. It could be a really great way of helping you spot mistakes that you've made. You might want to think about what a sensible answer might be before you answer a question so that you know if you're on the right track as you work your way through. And finally, make sure you use all of the time that's given to you. You've got 90 minutes to do 80 marks. So if you can work at approximately 1 mark per minute, which shouldn't be too difficult to be honest, and I'll explain why in a second, that would give you 10 minutes left at the end of your exam, which is time that you can spend going back through your work and checking it. And when you're checking it, it is doing these things before again. It's making sure you've attempted everything, making sure you've read the last line of the question and that your answer is sensible. And in terms of managing your time, you'll probably get through the marks at the start of the paper quite quickly, and that's going to give you more time to work on some of those harder marks towards the back end of the paper. So aim for a mark a minute. Know that you might end up working a bit quicker than that to start with. You'll have plenty of time to be checking your work at the end, but please don't waste it. So that's all from me. Good luck in your exam, and yeah, we'll look forward to getting them back and going through them with you once they've been marked.